Welcome again, all of you. It is great to have you here, and I would just like to thank you for joining the private sector mechanism of the UN Committee on Food Security for our global dialogue. My name is Rosemary Navarrete, representative of the PSM. The UN Committee on Food Security, as you know, is currently negotiating policy guidelines that are meant to be used all over the world to promote youth engagement and employment in agriculture and food systems. Our food systems have never been more in need of a fresh generation of talent. And we're here today to discuss existing initiatives in the region and to think about the common themes that could help youth find a future in food and the agriculture sector. But before we do that and get started, I just want to go over some light housekeeping. Just please note that this event is being recorded. And we would also like to inform you that interpretation is available and you may activate it at any time by clicking the planet logo at the bottom of your screen and selecting the language of your choice. When entering the call, please ensure your name appears correctly. You may want to use the rename function on the participant list for any corrections. And as of now, you are all muted, but we will activate your microphone if you're putting forward a question, because we want the session to be as interactive and dynamic as possible. So please do raise your electronic hand if you wish to intervene. We also invite you to introduce yourself and share your stories or comments in the chat, the Zoom chat function as well. We have measures in place to help maintain the integrity of this call. So if there's any disturbance, please bear with us and we will restore order shortly. It's our hope that today's session will provide a wealth of information and links to resources available and spur you to promote youth engagement and employment in agriculture and food systems. We also hope that you look at each other and think about building relationships with each other as well as a networking moment. I'd also like to remind you of the excellent work, of course, of the UN Committee on Food Security, including the voluntary guidelines on governance of tenure, responsible agricultural investment, and on food security and nutrition. We will provide, of course, that information and the links should be available to you. I'd also like to acknowledge the member states that have joined us. Thank you. Your time is precious, and the leaders in youth engagement, we really appreciate your time and that you're here. So thank you very much. I invite you all to introduce yourself, and please feel free to share where you are, where you're joining us from, and highlight any initiatives promoting youth engagement and employment in agriculture and food systems. But to start up this conversation, I would like to check right now, perhaps with the help of my colleagues, if the chairperson of the Committee on World Food Security has been able to join. I know that he was coming up to the dial.
Yes.
Wonderful. So it is my pleasure to give the floor to the chairperson of the Committee on World Food Security, Chairman and Ambassador Gabriel Ferrero. Mr. Chairman, you have the floor. Welcome.
Thank you very much indeed, Rosemary. And allow me to start by thanking Rick, Robin, and the entire private sector mechanism family for organizing this Global Youth Forum. It is a culmination of all the regional forums you have organized in the last few weeks. Well, dear colleagues and friends, this forum is really well timed, just ahead of the negotiations on the Committee on World Food Security's policy recommendations on youth engagement and employment in agriculture and food systems that are starting next Monday. I'm sure that these discussions will contribute substantively to shaping the final outcome of these policy recommendations that will be endorsed at our plenary, at the Committee on World Food Security plenary in Rome in October. Well, friends, engaging youth in a meaningful way is very close to my heart. I have two daughters that are really interested in the sector, and it's a priority of my term as the chair of the committee. Today's youth live in a world facing a confluence of crises, including climate and environmental challenges, global inequalities, pandemics, and conflicts, including the devastating war of aggression in Ukraine these days. And addressing these challenges cannot be done solely by those who created them, using the same means that got us here. Shaping the future has to be for youth, with youth, and by youth. This is by many of you who are here today in this forum. And you are doing it. I hope that we are doing it. You are making changes in villages and cities, learning institutions, civil society movements, and businesses. In April this year, when I was in Malabo in Equatorial Guinea for attending the FAO Regional Conference for Africa, I had the luck of meeting Pablo. Pablo is a vibrant young man who is transforming his community by processing cheese from goat milk collected from his neighbors. The cheese was excellent. It was tasty. It was as good, if not better, than any other one I have tasted before. But he has severe challenges. One of those, the core one, was how to get this cheese to major markets. Our colleagues published an example of millions of young people, like many of us today present, who are realizing fully the potential of agriculture and food systems for meaningful engagement and livelihoods, and are tapping into it. However, young people face many challenges, including limited access to and control over land, natural resources, to infrastructure, to markets, as Pablo, to insurance, to finance, to technology, to knowledge, to skills, as well as limited participation in decision-making processes. Exposure to risks, limited training and access to capital, low social recognition for agriculture and food workers, and poor wages turn many away from agriculture and from rural areas. So how do we enable and support them? How do we enable and support many of you that are young people willing to contribute through agriculture and food systems to global public goods, to feeding our neighbors, to feeding our families, to feeding the world, and to doing so sustainably? How do we help you? Well, at the Committee on World Food Security, we went out and asked youth what kind of support they need. Their input and recommendations are contained in the report launched last year on this topic, on how to promote youth engagement and employment in agriculture and food systems, a report that was prepared by the committee high-level panel of experts. And the report constitutes the basis of the CFS policy recommendations on youth engagement and employment in agriculture and food systems that we are working on with all of you. These policy recommendations, when endorsed in October, will provide the guidelines for policy actions necessary to boost your engagement in agriculture and food systems, empowering all the youth to do so. And there are 5 key recommendations. Well, first, we need to provide governments, all stakeholders need to provide an enabling environment for youth engagement and employment in agriculture and food systems. Second, secure, dignified, attractive and rewarding livelihoods. Third, increase equitable access to resources, infrastructure, and markets. Fourth, enhance equitable access to knowledge, education, and skills. And finally, 5, foster sustainable and inclusive innovation. Colleagues, these policy recommendations are envisioned as an ambitious, focused, and action-oriented tool that will encourage public policymakers to foster enabling environments capable of tapping into the energy and skills of youth to make agriculture and food systems become more sustainable and promote food security and nutrition. As their starting point, they call for the recognition of the diversity, intersectionality, and context specificity of youth aspirations, needs, and experiences across the globe. So, colleagues, concluding, I urge you all to continue engaging in this process that will lead us to finalizing these global policy recommendations. More importantly, I urge us all, especially the youth, to use the policy recommendations once endorsed as a tool to advocate for the right policies, investments, and practices by governments, the private sector, development partners, and all of us. For youth, I believe that the policy recommendations agreed by all countries in October will be an empowerment tool to make this a reality. So once again, thank you, Private Sector Mechanism, for organizing this forum. As you can tell, the energy of our young people has rubbed off on me. I am hopeful, I'm optimistic. I look to our young people to take charge and lead with their fresh ideas and energy, the transformation of our food systems while creating gainful employment opportunities for themselves. Young people, the youth, are willing indeed to be part of the 2030 agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals and making them a reality on time. You can count on the Committee on World Food Security to be the platform where we can celebrate your experiences and successes. I thank you very much indeed for having me here. And once again, thank you and congratulations for this forum. Over to you, Rosemary.
Thank you so much, Chairman Ferrero. Thank you so much for being here, for your time, and for those very inspiring words. Very much appreciated. Great to see you again, and thank you for participating in our dialogue this morning. So with that, I also want to make note that Mr. Ferrero is the current chair of CFS. We also have on the line, I want to acknowledge Yaya Olaniran, Ambassador of Nigeria, is also here. He's the past chair of CFS. So welcome to Yaya. We also have of note the International Association of Agricultural Students here as well with us here today, and leaders from Generation Africa as well. So excellent turnout. Great to have everyone here to get the program rolling along, and let's move it along. So in this next segment, we are pleased to have an excellent discussion and panel to discuss the issues of promoting youth engagement and employment in agriculture and food systems with a focus on Africa, Near East, and Latin Caribbean dialogue outcomes. So to start this off, I'd like to ask us to look at the highlights from the Africa and Near East Youth Dialogue. I think we have a video on that. Could you pop that up, please?
So this youth mentorship program by YPIDE is an annual event, but aside from the actual forum, there are some young people who have gone through mentorship and carrying out research, and we've seen a lot of growth and excitement around that interest from youth. For instance, in the last year's event, we had over 300 youth participating from 34 countries in Africa. And 7 countries out of Africa.
So the World Food Forum really is an independent global network of partners that creates a platform for youth engagement where young people from across the globe can come together to discuss, to deliberate, to engage with each other and to come up with actionable solutions. Food is one of the single greatest lever that can be able to help to transform young people.
For a young person to thrive in business, that environment where they exist, that surrounds them and the actors need to all pull their weight and work together to be able to make this business conducive and to make it make sense to have people who don't necessarily own land have access to land. And this is supported by the national policy.
On behalf of the entire private sector mechanism, we encourage you all to engage in the CFS, whether member states, civil society, research, or private sector. And of course, indeed, if you're young, please get involved. We need all actors working together to advance global food security, and the effective voices of those who are young now are crucial for defining future-proof strategies for sustainable agriculture.
Excellent. That was excellent. So that was Africa and Near East Youth Dialogue. Next, I'd like to turn to see some highlights here from the Latin America and Caribbean Youth Dialogue. We have a short video on that as well.
¿Cómo se pueden superar las barreras financieras y burocráticas que limitan muchas de estas?
How can we overcome bureaucratic obstacles that curb many of the initiatives we currently have. I would like to hear your point of view, the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture that cooperates with governments. I would like to know what your point of view is. How could governments overcome the bureaucracy? How could red tape be cut so that all these proposals and ideas could be brought to life? Maria, please go ahead. Thank you. I will try and be as brief as possible. It's an interesting matter. There's a political matter here in between. We can't ignore this matter. It's important to take that into account. But from different sectors, we can work on that. When I read the question, it struck me because I thought that one of the ways to go ahead, well, I think that initiatives should not remain on paper merely. So what happens often is that policies are created, but they are not brought alive. Lots of promises are made, but these are not put in action, really. They are not implemented. And so that's a problem. And one way of implementing these policies is precisely, for instance, this forum. And public policies should always be inclusive. They should take into account all kinds of people, regardless of their intersectionality or whatever. Intersectionality has to be taken into account too. And it's very important that all stakeholders, all parties, all actors work together. And we should never isolate the private sector from the public sector, but both should work together so that we can make sure that initiatives do not remain on paper merely. I hope that my answer that my reply answered your question. So which is the question? The question is to create programs in frameworks like family agriculture so that we can boost or help young farmers and young producers. And we always have to take into account also private markets and also private-public partnerships so that we can also give funding.
Excellent highlights from those two dialogues, and we certainly thank everyone for their active participation in those two dialogues. Now to further provide an overview of the dialogues, I would like to invite a report from Mr. Steve Nguyen, the Global Youth Forum Rapporteur. Steve, you have the floor, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. White, for the invitation to speak and to report on the dialogues that we've just had, the highlights. And as a youth, as a Global Youth Forum Rapporteur, I want to share that we kicked off on a high with these two sessions. And from the content, there were from the content discussions to the vast backgrounds of participants. The scene was surely set, on a high, and we can just say that we had a very good kickoff of this, and definitely it went on high and high from that. Now, to give a brief, following were proposed suggestions and policy recommendations. And from the African Near East, we had develop and implement policies that enable land community land police, because some of the recommendations were there was a lot of community spaces that were there, but then priority be given to young farmers without access to any ancestral land. Another recommendation was facilitate youth participation in continental trade and global exports. And also another one which was good was provide subsidies on farming inputs for young farm organization. Heavy tax burdens are being witnessed, but these are some of the initiatives that were being recommended. We also, they always say, if you're not on the table, you're definitely on the menu. So the youth were discussing and saying they need youth representation in policy and decision making. Something similar to the need also representation from a bottom up also recommendations that are very fit to what they want and how they want it. And finally, one of the recommendations was to develop ecosystem policies that support access to finance for investments. So it's a very holistic trait. So an ecosystem that supports from finance to marketing to trade. So those were some of the key highlights that we saw that were picked up on the African Near East Youth Dialogues. And moving on to the Latin American Caribbean Youth Dialogues, as we have seen in the highlights, there was very much great representation from youth from across this region. We had individuals, we had partners, we had youth groups from across different agricultural backgrounds and practices. And, you know, coming from Africa, where I am right now, you know, I once in a while I turned off to the translation button to listen to the beautiful language of Portuguese and Spanish, but also had to quickly just move back and jot down some of the summary policy recommendations, which I will highlight just below. So we had policy recommendations that support some of them were to support agricultural education programs. Again, some of this that we saw were also highlighted in different regions that were saying that from primary school to post-university training, including agronomy, finance, entrepreneurship, leadership, and communication. Another highlight was to promote inclusiveness and open dialogue on agriculture across the different civil society groups and private and public sectors to inform policies on youth and agriculture. Another recommendation was to accelerate the infrastructural development in the rural areas, including improving the internet connectivity and broadband access, which will definitely help in reporting, measurement, and even projection of some of the needs on technology. We also had a policy recommendation that will enable young people engage in decision-making processes across agricultural policies by creating a quota system that allows the guaranteed participation of young people in decision-making. And finally, last but not least, we saw a recommendation of just to allow the building capacity, recommendation of building capacity of young people, primarily focusing on women and vulnerable groups. So these were some of the dialogues that the recommendations that we picked up from that. And we will definitely be picking up more of this into the coming days ahead. So thank you so much, Mr. White, and over to you.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you so very much for that excellent overview, Steve. Much appreciated. A lot of information there. And yes, thank you for hitting the highlights for us. So now, next we are going to go into the next segment. And it really gives me great pleasure to invite our moderators from the two sessions to share some of their highlights from the conversations. First of all, I would like to invite the permanent representative designate of Panama to FAO, WFP, and IFAD, His Excellency Thomas Duncan, to share some highlights from the Latin America and Caribbean Youth Dialogue. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Rick, for the introduction, and good morning and good afternoon to all the participants of this forum. Now I will switch to Spanish. Please remember to connect the interpretation available for this event. A
few weeks ago, I was moderating a dialogue about participation and employment of young people in food systems and agriculture, and different actors of the private sector and international groups. We were talking about the different issues that could help them to find a future in this food sector. The result was a series of recommendations that will be used by PSM during the consultations that the CFS is organizing to define different policies that will be used all over the world to promote participation and employment of young people. Our food systems need a new generation, And that's why we need to debate and we need to support the private sector. We need to share different initiatives. We need to think together about the different issues and the different areas where young people could find a job in our sector. And this was one of the recommendations in our dialogue. Other recommendations were about education, access to resources, empowerment, etc. On education, at the dialogue, we were talking about public and private sectors working together to develop education programs. We need to train young people in this agricultural sector. We need to teach them how to respect the system that we have. Also, technical tools to be able to enter the market and to promote entrepreneurship. Access to resources. To the recommendations were based on the need to create inclusive policies taking into account gender and the environment protection to facilitate young people access to agriculture. Also, we need to improve connectivity. They need to invest in technological tools to create added value. We were also talking about credits to develop rural entrepreneurship. We need farmers to be paid to have an economic satisfaction, to be able to develop personally. We need different tools to get young people to our sector. And that's why we were talking about common processes to cooperate between the private and the public sector. We need to take this opportunity to help young people to get into this sector. These are some of the recommendations of our group. And I would like to thank the PSM for their invitation to participate at this event and to be able to contribute on this issue that is very important, the generational change. We need farmers to be attracted, to get into this area and to work in this area. Thank you.
Excellent points, and thank you so very much for those highlights, Your Excellency, very much appreciated. Okay, we're going to shift regions here a little bit, and in this next segment, we are pleased to have an excellent discussion panel to talk about the issue of promoting youth engagement and employment in agriculture and food systems with a focus on Africa, Near East, and Latin Caribbean dialogue outcomes. But first, let's look at the highlights from the Europe and Asia Youth Dialogue. We have a short video on that.
How can we make food systems more inclusive for young people with disabilities that may be living in rural or urban areas?
The idea of like in so many places and in so many countries, like agriculture yet doesn't have a lot of marketing, like digital marketing development. And a lot of farmers that are doing a great work don't know yet how to share a narrative and to have like ownership and agency to share the narrative. And on that, like it's super important, like the inclusivity of those that are like physically disabled that can support in all these activities.
I think unlocking investments for the youth in the agriculture sector. And then after unlocking the business, it goes through mentorship and exposure to successful agripreneurs, and also, you know, create an ecosystem that they will thrive together with NGOs, academia that will do R&D. But money fuels change, right? And most of the time, youth, they have all the ideas, but they don't have the resources. So for me, unlocking investment is one.
Policy making could be done through two things: education and fundings for youth-led movements in particular. Education is super important, also as Sylvain Kelly said, and by showing young people where food comes from, and by showing them how great this whole world is behind the supermarket and behind the things that you get out of the supermarket, I think you would really get like young people excited and probably grateful also for the food that we consume daily, and which would also help in like getting more young people excited in pursuing a job in agriculture.
Estoy de acuerdo con lo que Silke ha dicho.
I agree with Silke. I will focus on our case study the match funding and crowdfunding campaigns. I believe this is very good for young entrepreneurs to access funding. I hope regional municipalities can organize open calls for specific projects and programs. I hope there are young disabled people that can be part of these programs. And if those projects reach a minimum amount of funds and donors, maybe we can match that amount.
Our government started to give some money to young farmers who is just start farming. That was quite effective for young farmers. And also I think that farmers should cooperate with education. So they learn and also they support it. Yeah, I think.
Excellent. Let's now turn to the highlights from the North American and the Pacific Youth Dialogue. Let's see that video.
We are the premier global forum to harness this passion of young individuals in terms of agri-food systems. And what we do is to try to give young people a voice and put them at the same level of bigger leaders, for example, at FAO or other UN organizations, so that their solutions and their voices are heard. We are convinced that food is the single strongest lever to optimize human health and environmental sustainability on Earth. So in the last couple of years, we've been hearing about health everywhere with the pandemic. We want to put the accent to the fact that without food, there can be no health. And we are convinced that young people are not the future. We believe that they are, and let me include myself in that group. We are the present, and this is what we want to give a platform for our voices to be heard.
The very challenging thing we face, and that probably you young folks who are on the call face, agriculture and food security work spans across so many different stakeholder groups, so many interests, and so many different ways that you can get plugged in that in some cases it's difficult to understand what the best mechanism might be. So a good thing for us to think about with each other.
4-H especially, we do try to spend time understanding that the world is bigger than any one person, right? And this forum right now is kind of highlighting the importance of understanding the connections between people, between communities, between countries, and having that awareness of culture and of history of food insecurity and which communities have less access than others and why. And then the policies connected to those things are so critical. So understanding those technical skills are certainly important, but then understanding the history and cultures within the food system, in particular in this case, is a real critical skill and is something that I know employers would be happy to know a employee had that background and skill set.
Excellent insights and highlights from those two videos. And we thank everyone for their engaged and active participation in both of those dialogues. So now to provide an overview, a further overview of the dialogues, I'd like to invite a report from Mr. Steve Nguyen, the Global Youth Forum Rapporteur. Steve, over to you, please.
Thank you, Mr. White, once again. Allow me to share the summary points of the recommended policy suggestions that were captured for the Europe and Asia dialogue. Once again, we were graced with such a wealth of insights from case studies from these regions, and not only just case studies from a while back, but actually some of this really captured what the world has gone through in the past 2 years with the pandemic, and also what we are facing in the crisis in Ukraine and Russia. So some of this were really driven by actions that needed to be worked on right now and immediately. So the youth participations and intervention was so rich, and it's only time that we were limited to highlight all the interventions which were there. But allow me to share some of these highlights on the Europe and Asia dialogues. Again, as I mentioned, some of this were also we found correlation with some of the dialogues across. So like the first one, which was to accelerate school-based agricultural education across all students and from the primary school. And we could tell that this was also mentioned in another forum. So the youth are speaking from one voice, depending on wherever they are. The other one was to facilitate access to credit and funding system for youth-led initiatives. We had from the highlights there some references to crowdfunding being mentioned. So also we had a reference point to promote preferential pricing and financing of land purchase for the youth. Another policy recommendation was that to ensure youth participation in policy development, which addresses both the immediate and future interest of young people. So it is not just an immediate effect, but actually a long-term policy recommendations that will bear fruit at a latter point. The fifth one from the Europe and Asia dialogues, we saw that provide policies that increase participation of youth living with disabilities and areas of conflict. This was very, very spot on in terms of some of the reactions that were happening in areas of conflict, people living with disabilities, and that we need to really capture that within this space. And lastly but not least on this dialogue, we were to look at what space collaborate with youth as change agents on both production and consumption. In this space, we were highlighted that the median age is 21 years old in one of the continents. So how do we increase their participation in production and also at the tail end on consumption aspect of it? And our final dialogue leading to this session was North America and the Pacific Youth Dialogue, and the attendance was great, and anticipation of the youth presentations and participation were definitely very engaging and rich. And our expectation, as we have always gone, is to have these sessions also as networking opportunities, and we really saw the chat platform being very active, and I'm very sure that some of the engagements will go past the online dialogues that were set. So just to share some highlights on the North America and the Pacific Youth Dialogues, we had the increase of funding for collaboration between different mentorship and education programs to enhance education, international networks that youth can engage with across different agricultural industries, cultures, and continents. The second one was ensure that government or institutional investments in agriculture are linked with developing youth engagement and employment. That these processes are not exclusive of each other, and that investment is considered from a social, political, economic, and environmental perspective. We also discussed that we need to promote partnerships between the private sector, civil society, government, and international institutions that can create mechanisms to remove the barriers of entry into agriculture for youth. Another recommendation was the Center of Voices for Youth Farmers in policy discussions, recognizing that young people are the most affected by decisions made today. Another strong recommendation was we need to develop and legislate appropriate labor laws, taking into account the living conditions, income, and occupational health and safety. We also discussed that another recommendation that was set up was to increase the agricultural education in schools, recognizing the complexity of food systems. This was very needed because we know that there's a complexity of this and specific educational insights is needed. Last but not least was a recommendation to develop standardized digital capabilities for open source databases that can be used and analyzed quickly. So these were some of the highlights that was spotted from the North America and Youth and the Pacific Youth Dialogues. And over to you, Mr. White.
Excellent. Thank you, Steve. Excellent reporting, summarization, and articulation of some of the recommendations. There's a lot of excellent information there. So thank you for communicating that to us in a way that really makes the point. So thanks again, Steve. Okay, now let us move here from the North America and the Caribbean Youth Dialogue. I'm very pleased to invite the evaluation officer from the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research, Mr. Matt Armstrong, to share some of the highlights of that dialogue. So, Mr. Armstrong, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you so much. And yeah, I think Steve did a really good job at discussing the key recommendations that came out of our discussion. But given that we had representatives from both Australia and North America, I was actually quite struck by the similarities between the conversations that we were having when people who didn't necessarily get to interact a whole lot. So that was really, really good to see. And also just from the discussions that we've had already, the similarities between our discussion and the ones that we've had across the world. So it's good to see that there's a lot of similarities there that we can work on in a kind of a global sense. Given the context of our discussion being as well in a high technology, high input agriculture system, it generally means that our challenges were focused around not food production being in terms of quantity, but in terms of access, value chains, and affordability. And I think that took us to a different angle, very much from the angle that of developing young professional people and farmers in particular to engage in agriculture and have an exciting career in this area where we have an aging farm workforce and an aging farmers as well. So I think it was clear from both the participants, and I hope that it's true for me as well, that these young people who are engaged at the moment have an enormous amount of passion and a strong desire to do public good and work towards global food security. So we were lucky to have some of those people with us as well. And it was clear that one of the strengths that we had was that we have a big stake in the game for global environmental sustainability and food security challenges. So we were very much focused on providing people who are already engaged and also engaging new people to give them opportunities to engage in the food system and give them opportunities to have a broader range of opportunities, but also, as Steve mentioned as well, funding was an important component of that as well. I just wanted to give one specific example because we had so many great things and we saw some of that in the highlights. But Claire Peltzer, who is a Nuffield scholar, I think, brought up this example of connecting aspiring farmers with who need experience and land as being an important component of that, with older farmers who are looking to retire in the future as a way of transitioning and as people who don't want to see their farm be sold off, but actually continue operating. So I thought that was a really interesting and innovative solution to dealing with some of the challenges that we're facing in our region. But thank you so much. And we had a really good discussion this morning.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt. And many thanks to all our regional moderators for the amount of excellent work that has come out of those dialogues. Thank you so very much. Wonderful information and dialogue and recommendations coming forward. Very useful. Okay, our next panel will be composed of regional representatives from the regional dialogues. So we're going to be looking for questions, but please keep your questions and comments in chat, and the panel will respond to them. So right now, I would like to introduce and invite the panel, and we have from the Africa and Near East, Ms. Millicent Agadipo Adobo, CEO of Dahlia Foods, From the Latin and Caribbean region, we have Ms. Anna Carolina Farmer, from there. And from Europe and Asia, Mr. Jim Kano, founder of 360PH. And from the North and Pacific, Mr. Wayne Dredge, Nuffield Scholar. So we are open for questions to the panel. Welcome to the panelists, first of all. Prepared to take questions and answer those questions. So I'll try to keep a watch out for that. First of all, maybe to get it started, I could call on Mr. Pablo Inecam Zuniga. Pablo, are you there? Do you have a question for the panel?
Yes, I am here. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the International Agri-Food Network for holding this important event that insert rural youth at the center of the analysis and highlight their role in achieving global food security and the sustainability of food systems. In December 2017, the United Nations General Assembly proclaimed the Decade of Family Farming as a way to enhance food security, nutrition, and sustainable agricultural practices carried out by millions of family farmers around the world. Costa Rica has been the main government proponent of this decade as a way to aim the support for the achievement of zero hunger in the 2030 agenda and making the role of family farmers more visible. However, the COVID-19 pandemic, which has imposed a series of enormous challenges and the collapse of large sectors of the economy, has provided an opportunity for the reevaluation of the agricultural sectors. Thanks to the millions of family farmers around the world, the global food supply chain has not come to halt. On the contrary, it has been one of the most successful sectors in the response to the pandemic and avoided an unprecedented food crisis. Faced with the adverse conditions imposed by climate change, the social divide, exclusion, and poverty to the rural life, the implementation of the Decade of Family Farming incorporates to a global action plan concepts such as the creation of resilient and sustainable food systems and the socioeconomic development of rural communities, which are vital in current context. The global action plans indeed has two cross-cutting themes: support for young rural producers and the promotion of gender equity, encouraging rural women's leadership and demanding better and greater opportunities, which translate into access to rural credits, markets, and resources for innovation. But there is a concern about the generational replacement in the agri-food sector. In other words, who will produce the food we will need in the future? According to FAO statistics, family farmers produce about 80% of the world's food. Small and medium-sized producers are, however, the sector of the population that suffer the most from climate change, not to mention the challenges that rurality often impose on the living conditions of the inhabitants. For example, in terms of gender equality, access to basic services, access to economically attractive and sustainability livelihoods. So the role of young people and the generation change in the agricultural sector is a global challenge, but a very small percentage of young people are attracted to farming. If there is no generational replacement, there will not be people to supply the future food demand of the planet. Access to markets for young people in terms of family farming should be enhanced so that they can participate and benefit economically. A successful example is the initiative of the private sector mechanism under the Committee of Food Security of the FAO called Connecting Smallholders to Markets, which evidences and highlights that private sector actors are key partners for sustainable development in economic, social, and environmental issues, but also for the achievement of the SDGs and the 2030 Development Agenda. So after this small reflection and ideas, my question to the panelists and the speakers is, how do we make the countryside and the agricultural sector attractive to new generations? How to incorporate technological innovation, market access, and economic development schemes for young people entering in the agricultural sector? What is the solution? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pablo, for that intervention and that question. Maybe I'll just give the panel an opportunity to comment on that. Anna, do you want to start us off in response to Pablo?
Thank you, Rick. That's a very tricky question. with a partner of the world, but the first thing I think we should do is make farming sexy, if you know what I mean. Normally we see farmers as some people that are not really innovative, or some people who are far from the cities and not in a very attractive way. So I was talking to my fellows in Nuffield CSC in the UK, and we were talking about how we could make farming more attractive. Also, we need more infrastructure, for example, with internet. We don't know any young people who want to have lives without internet, even like very, even with COVID, it was really hard to have access to education without internet or a proper way. And in Brazil, we also struggle with that. Now we have different types of internet coming, but it's still a problem. And also, how could we be better involved in decision-making, especially for women and people who have vulnerabilities. So I truly believe that communication is a better way to do it. And I also believe in the power of networks on how we can better engage and have these things in a collaborative way together. But mainly it's about communicating and asking for people to how farming could be. Also, Robin said something on the chat that was really important about being profitable. I mean, farming could be attractive in a way of producing food, but if we cannot make profit out of it, we cannot have a good life, we cannot make something out of it. So it has to be sustainable in a way of environment, it has to be sustainable in a way of social aspects, but also we have to earn money from it. Otherwise, we won't be sustainable at all. We won't have the ability to continue it for the future generations.
Thanks, Anna. Millicent, do you want to weigh in on this?
Yes. And so one of the things I want to say concerning that, especially from where I'm coming from in Africa, one of the things that will really make the youth more engaged in agriculture is to provide scholarships. Currently, we are working with a lot of women smallholder farmers, and most of them are, from very poor backgrounds. And sometimes it's not encouraging when they see that the investments they need to go into agriculture is something that they cannot afford financially. So for me, I would really encourage that we give scholarships to the next generation, so that especially because in Africa, over 60% of smallholder farmers, over 60% of the population are smallholder farmers, and most of them are women. And it's interesting to know that most of them come from very poor backgrounds, and they may not have the capacity financially to be able to take agriculture to the next level. So there should be that kind of scholarships given, so that they're able to further their education in agriculture and all that. Another thing I want to mention is we should encourage farm visits. I mean, I'm a food scientist, and whilst I was in school, I never had the opportunity to visit a farm. I didn't know how crops are grown, how they are nurtured, how they become big trees and all that. So I think that if there can be a policy in all the educational institutions, irrespective of even your background or the course that you study, there should be some form of farm visits where people, the youth especially, are able to have access to go and visit farms to learn on what it means to, grow the agricultural sector. That can also really help. For instance, at Achiever Foods, one of the things that we have started, we really believe in youth empowerment and youth engagement. We have given some internship scholarships to some students in my community, my rural community, who have access to come to our factory during their vacation periods to learn on how we process our raw materials into the finished products and all that. And most of them are people who are interested in agriculture, and you could see that they were so excited and they are really looking forward to also come out with innovative products. So we have started this in Achiever Foods in Ghana. We give the youth the opportunity to come to our factory to have some internship and to really help them. When we do this, I believe that it will really go a long way to build the next generation and with a mindset of agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you. Jim, let's go to you. How do you feel?
All right, thanks. Thank you for that question. And I think first of all, before we go into how do we attract young people, it's really important that we understand and we know where young people are coming from. And so knowing the context in which they're in helps us understand the kinds of policies and programs that need to be developed that address them at where they're at right now. And so, that starts off with awareness. Me going into university studying agriculture is something that was unheard of from my city, because most of my classmates and schoolmates went into the usual courses that they would know of. Nobody never really thought of agriculture. I was the only one from that batch that went into agriculture, and that's, I think, a key thing to understand, is that awareness of opportunities is a very huge gap. And I think that's very crucial, that we have to be able to broadcast the opportunities that agriculture provides for young people. And we have to break the notion that agriculture is only farming. We have to look at the whole spectrum from farm to fork and provide that spectrum to young people, that they can be in agriculture without having to, just farm. Because sometimes we put it into a box that we say, agriculture, you have to be in agriculture because who's going to feed the next generation? And there are young people. We have to be accepting of the fact that there are young people who will not want to be out there in the field, but they are good at different things. They can be good at marketing. They could be good at content creation. They could be good at policy making or advocating for policies for fellow young people, and even doing research. And so I think that's very crucial, that we're able to recognize the plethora of skills that young people have and then meet them at where they're at. And so aspiration and awareness are very crucial, because that leads to action. And so, just an example is that one of the startup companies that I'm a part of in the Philippines, which is Go Eden, is an e-commerce platform wherein we're creating an e-commerce platform specifically for agricultural inputs. And when I say we create supportive mechanisms, this is a great example, because a research institution like the Southeast Asian Regional Center for Research and Graduate Study in Agriculture, CIRCA, has created a program that works closely now with industry and private sector. And so they've created a grant fund to fund young people who would go into this thing. And so they've granted us a fund to start up a pilot of this module that we're working with. And we're working with cooperatives and brick and mortar stores, putting their inventory into our system so that we can link them up with farmers. And so these are examples in which, it's not just going to be, how do we make it so attractive that we're so at the high level, but we sometimes miss what young people need at the ground. And it's very crucial that that policymakers see that gap and be able to provide budgets with policies that will lead to programs that will transform young people's lives and bring them into agriculture.
Points. Excellent. Wayne, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. White, and thank you for the question, Pablo. Just to go on a little bit from what Jim was saying about broader opportunities in agriculture, I think ultimately what we really need to do is to reframe what these challenges actually are. So much policy directed around food security is about alleviating poverty and not necessarily about creating prosperity. Nothing attracts entrepreneurship greater than a challenge. So if we start talking about early agricultural education, we need to be teaching about soil erosion, climate change, ocean acidification, and asking people, here's a challenge. There are so many fields that are required to actually meet and beat this challenge. Go out and take that on. Young people love a challenge. Entrepreneurs love a challenge. That's how problems are solved. And I think that unless we actually reframe it as a way of creating prosperity and solving global problems, as opposed to just better livelihoods and eradicating poverty, it's not going to attract the talent that we really need.
Brilliant start. Excellent. Thank you for those responses. I think we have another question with a hand up from Robin. Over to you, Robin.
Thanks so much, Rick. It's such a pleasure to have all of you here, and having had the opportunity to see all of the regional dialogues, I noticed different characters in each one. There was that really powerful discussion about the whole of the food value chain in Africa and practicality of whether or not you can make a living in the business. But the other things that I also saw is that there seems to be a lack almost of clear metrics. And Jim was just alluding to this about what are we trying to achieve? Do we want to scale up agricultural based school education across the world? How many countries, how many students? Do we want to encourage the community of case studies we saw here to be linking up so that young entry-level programs like 4-H lead into later career programs like Nuffield? Do we want to set a target for how much financing is available for young farmers, or X number of farmers move into the sector? How do we stop talking just about the case studies and the great work that's being done, but actually join it up to be more powerful? That's my question to the panel. Thanks.
Excellent question, Robin. Thank you. Jim, do you want to take a first crack at that?
Well, thanks, Robin, for that question. I think the different case studies have given us a glimpse, I would say, of what young people need in different regions, and so we can see there are common themes, but there's also variability in terms of being in terms of context, how one specific program may be implemented in Asia, even if done in Europe, may have different effects because of the difference in context. And I think that has to be very clear that when we introduce programs and when we create programs and policies, it has to be context specific. And so now I think the key thing is coming from the case studies being presented, what's been shared the past 2 weeks in the different dialogues and up to now. I think the action forward, the way forward really is how do we create now meaningful relationships between the young people, policymakers, private sector, and other stakeholders, so that we can support young people as early as they can, they can see themselves or aspire to be something. I talked about aspiration a while ago, and this is something I always talk about with young people, is that back when I was 6, I never thought of wanted to be a YouTuber. But then I talked to my nephew, and that's the buzzword for them. I want to be a YouTuber. I can do content creation. I can talk. And so that's an aspiration that you can see, that young people see, because that's what they're exposed to. If we create enough mechanisms that expose them to the opportunities in agriculture, then we can see a generation that would aspire to be part of the food systems in achieving solutions for food systems. So what's really crucial now is moving forward is how do we now put into metrics specifically how many young people do we need do we have right now, baseline information that are in agriculture, how many are being supported, how can we do better? I think that's what governments and private sector can work on together in delivering programs that meet young people at where they're at.
Thanks, Jim. Millicent, you want to go?
Yeah, so what I want to add to that is, generation is about families, and in many parts of the world, especially in Africa, where I come from, lands are owned by families, and I mean, there's no agriculture without the use of land. And so one of the things that I think we can do, for instance, when we were going to start growing our crops, we had to train the women smallholder farmers, because most of them were illiterate and they didn't know the nitty-gritties that were involved to be able to grow the crops the way we wanted it. And what we had to do is, we didn't just train the immediate farmers, we also tried to involve their children into the training processes. So by doing that, we engage them on a family level, so that even when one person is not available, we know we can rely on another family member to continue the chain. And so for me, I think that's one of the things that we can do to be able to really involve. And with that, we can look at that in the sense of getting the numbers. Because for instance, families are in numbers. We can have a family of 5, a family of 6, and probably as the generation keeps growing, they keep giving birth to, different regions or sectors. So we can decide that, okay, when we take family A, and we are going to be training about 6 people from this particular family who are going to take on agriculture to the next level. And then we build on that. I think when we started from the family levels, it will really, really help, especially in the rural communities, to get us to where we want to go to. That is what I want to add to that. Yeah.
Thanks, Millicent. Wayne, you want to weigh in? I think you're on mute, Wayne.
Sorry, Rick, and thank you. The topic around metrics and targets is really important. From the CFS guidelines to these youth forums, everything has been very much around the content of what's happening now and about objectives of what we want in the future, but without any actual specific outcomes that we're trying to achieve, I feel. And I mentioned this to Robin the other day. I think that what these networks have been developed here and through the CFS negotiations should start considering is what type of case studies would all of you like to be seeing in 10 years' time? If we run this event again in 10 years' time, what's the case studies you would like to be seeing then? And if we can start picturing what that looks like, we can start working back towards it, and that can filter through the CFS policy recommendations. And I think that's a better way of trying to get there and maybe a different way of thinking about it. Yeah, I'll defer to Anna now.
Thanks, Wayne. Anna, over to you.
Yeah, so thanks for the question, Robin. I'm going to give you my example. So I am a farmer. I raise beef cattle, but actually I am an industrial engineer. So I'm not from the agricultural background, but for a year now, I've been looking for a cattle. And then I also have my team who can help me with veterinarian skills. But I'm really good at management, for example. So I totally highlight what Jim said about looking for different parts also from the food system, from farm to fork. And for example, I need a software to manage my entire so the herd. So I need someone who's looking for the pasture with agricultural skills. I need someone who is looking for infrastructure. So we need different people with different skills for the whole system. And people in the city should know that. I have so many of my friends who are from the city who have never considered a career inside the food system because they don't know it's a path. Even if they did law or they studied different things, they don't really consider it. And I also would like to address what Wayne said about how we should reframe it somehow. So for example, we're talking about how can we reduce or mitigate the problems with climate change. But what if climate change is already on its way? What are we doing to adapt? I mean, how can we, of course, we should look for carbon and etc. But what if it doesn't help? We're just gonna sit and cry. What are the other options? How can we have better crops, or how can we better adapt in a way, even with all these bad things happening, we could still assure food for everyone and also in a profitable way. So it's just letting people know they have the opportunity, and also think about how can we better create value. And the last topic that I want to talk about is not just about technical skills, which I think is very important, but mainly entrepreneurial and leadership skills, because with those two, you can work in anywhere you want, and we can create better food systems, not specific in a sector. We can have different types of food and different types of business, but it's still business, it's still leadership, it's still people. So I think we should invest on that. Thank you.
Wonderful conversation so far. I think I got about 3 minutes. I can squeeze in probably one more question here. I've got a hand up with event guest number 14. The floor is yours, sir. I'm not sure what your name is, but go ahead.
Yeah, I'm both. I'm Apia Kwekubuatin, the Executive Director of 4H Ghana. If you hear me clearly, what I just want to add. What I want to add is the issue of partnership and networking
in trying to consolidate the gains and achievement of some of the programs that we run. 4H Ghana has done a lot in Ghana in terms of youth and agriculture. However, we continue to struggle with funding and scaling up our programs in many communities that we continue to work. I believe that if the actors, the social actors, both the state and other institutions like the Ministry of Agriculture, Education, and other institutions that we work together can come out with a very clear policies that support each other. Because if you look at the program that we run in the various communities, we have very little staff that can be able to go around to do all those activities. But here we have extension officers who are paid by government. We have teachers and other people that can easily join hands to work together. But you can see that because there's no clear-cut policies as to how we can synchronize and have a synergy, our work have become disintegrated and like each and everyone is going a different direction. But if you look at the SDG number 17, which talks about partnership, I think that it is very, very important that moving on, every country in Africa is talking about youth in agriculture. We're talking about youth and agriculture is key in African's economic agenda. However, the approach, I think it will take us a long time to be able to achieve this goal of trying to get many young people to, go into agriculture as we've been doing. We continue to work with various actors and partners. And every year, we continue to struggle to look for money to be able to scale up our programs. Why? Meanwhile, I know there's a huge budget sitting in other departments and agencies that can come together. So I think that as we continue to drum home these messages, at the international level, I think one of the key things that we also need to be looking at is how we can build a strong partnership and networking at the various country level to be able to make some programs more achievable. 4H programs are growing very fast in Africa, but it's been driven by the very few private people who develop interest in the philosophy. And I think the process is very, very slow. I think that's what I get.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I am going to ask for a quick fire response from the panel. Millicent, do you want to go first?
Okay, so is it based on what he said or a general input? Sorry. Hello?
I think we can take either, Millicent.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yes. So, well, finally, what I want to say is that collaboration is key in getting us to where we need to be when it comes to youth engagement in agriculture. No one body or institution can do it all. And so instead of living as independent bodies, we need to collaborate. When we collaborate, we can share ideas, we can share thoughts, and then we'll be able to, help grow and nourish the world and make it a better place. So collaboration is key. In all these things, when we collaborate, like you said, when there are partnerships, when institutions, interested bodies come together and we put our heads together, I believe that we are going to, really make a good impact when it comes to youth engagement in agriculture. So collaboration is key. Let's collaborate on all levels because agriculture, the value chain is long. Right from farm to fork to, products to services to marketing and all that. And no one person can really do that. We need a great product. We need good marketing. We need a good financial management system and a lot of things. So let's collaborate, let's partner together, and then we can realize this goal and this vision. Yeah, thank you.
Wayne, over to you.
Yeah, the point of everybody running around trying to achieve the same thing but going in different directions. Ultimately, I think that to a large degree is a lack of resources to try and pull all these pieces of the puzzle together. Robin mentioned before setting up fast track things so people that go through 4H programs are set on a path towards a Nuffield scholarship or Global Farmers Network or something like that. All of that actually takes quite a lot of resources, though, to be able to pull those pieces together. And that really is an issue of funding, which is something the CFS policy recommendations actually are trying to address. So, yeah, hopefully something.
Thank you. Anna, over to you.
Well, for sure, governments give scale, but you probably noticed I'm a big enthusiast of entrepreneurship. So even in small scale, we have great study case, for example, UNOS with small and medium businesses. So perhaps a big community of microcredit or some cases like that would help. And also I believe in private-public partnerships. So not just trust in companies in institutions to just give the resources, but how can we within our communities create value, even if it's small by small. So maybe that's an alternative. I don't have all the answers, but that is what I would go for it.
Anna. And Jim, we'll wind it up with you. Go ahead, please.
Thanks, Rick. I think, we really need to, I do agree with the rest of the panel that looking at collaboration and networks. And I think the fact that we're all here is a fruit of that network that we've gone into, and also the same common aspirations to see young people engaged and employed in agriculture. What's really crucial is for networks to be able to recognize the dynamism of young people's skills. Young people can be very mobile, just as we've written in the report, that young people can be very mobile. They can be in the rural space at one point, and then into the urban city, urban setting and another point. And what's crucial is that we create enough enabling environment to support young people wherever they're at. And that's where the networks come in. How do we create the structures that provide the support mechanism for young people, no matter what setting they're in, so that they can achieve the aspirations that they set out for themselves in agriculture and food systems? So it's very crucial for us to be able to not put young people in a box, to brand young people that just because you're in university, you will be in university the rest of your life. Because you're in farming, you're just in farming for the rest of your life. I think there's that breadth of opportunities that young people should be connected to, and that's where the networks and collaboration should come in, and that's where policies and programs should be able to create that support mechanism for young people.
Excellent. Thank you. And I apologize, we're not going to be able to get to all the questions. There are a couple of hands up, but we do have to move along with the agenda here. Thank you so much to the panelists. Brilliant discussion and responses, very enlightening, very much appreciated. So thank you. We'll now move on to our next point on the agenda. And so at this point, I'd like to hand the floor over to Edward Bogart from the World Food Forum, who will offer a presentation on the work of the FAO in World Food Forum. Over to you, Edward.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you all for having me here. It's really a pleasure also to hear the really inspired dialogue that's going on. So I know we only have a short time for presentation here, but I'm here from the FAO and specifically representing the World Food Forum, which launched last year by the Youth Committee of FAO to get young people involved in a more systematic way, I think, as Jim was saying, in terms of all areas of agri-food systems transformation. I am going to quickly share a short video to give a little bit of a flavor of what we do, and then I'll wrap up by giving a kind of a short presentation on how people can get involved. So let me try this. Hopefully, actually, let me just make sure that the audio is sharing. Apologies for that. Know where my video has gone. Okay, here we go.
we are so committed to put together the truly youth-led platform to transform our food system. And for me, and I guess for everyone else here, this is a clear indication that to build better food systems, young people must be leading the way. We still have time and energy to bring about change for the better, for better production, better nutrition, better environment, better life, and why not, for a better future. A future in which the rest of the world focuses on eliminating barriers such as finance, land, and information that prevent young people from meaningfully engaging in different components of food system. And a future in which you and me and those who will come after us will inherit food systems that are better for the health of people, animals, plants, and the planet.
Okay, thank you. And thanks for listening to that. Hopefully you had a little bit of a sense of the flavor of what we're doing. I'm going to really quickly share now a little more specifically, what we do and how we can get people involved. Like I said, we were launched early last year by the Youth Committee here at the FAO, really to create awareness around all these issues we just showed there, but more importantly, to engage young people, to get them involved. And ultimately to give them the more structured support that they need to actually have an impact on transforming agri-food systems. And the way that we have set this up is through several tracks that we've created to get young people involved. So first off, I think Jim was mentioning this a little bit in the last session, but we need to have a systematic and inclusive way to give young people a structured voice in all food governance bodies, including CFS and of course FAO. And so of course we have set up here the Youth Action Track, which is basically our policy arm, a way for young people to have a voice in global governance and decision-making bodies. We've also recognized that young people should have more structured hands-on support in solution development, particularly for things like innovation and tech advancement, which is what we've set up with an innovation lab where we run a startup competition, some research competitions, and a series of master classes to educate young people. And then, of course, underpinning all of that is a better food system education, starting at a much younger age, so primary school, secondary school aged children and educators. We have our education track set up to really bring those materials at a much younger age and get people involved so that hopefully this can be a ongoing, sustainable change that we're creating. And then lastly, we do recognize that the UN is often talking to the same stakeholders. We want to bring in people from around the world, regardless of where they are, what their involvement in food or decision making or anything is. So we have a culture track where we have concerts, film festival that we're actually launching later today, cooking activities, art. So different ways to bring in different types of audience to the discussions. So lastly, I mentioned in the video that the theme this year is on healthy diets, healthy planet. So bringing attention to that intersection of nutrition, of the impacts of our food systems on the climate and vice versa. And we will, of course, be doing activities throughout the year. We have challenges in activities and events going on now through, of course, October. And we will actually have our second flagship event the week right after CFS, the 17th to the 21st of October, along with the Science and Innovation Days of FAO and an investment week focused on our hand-in-hand initiative. So we hope to see many of you involved in as many ways as possible going forward. So thank you, and back to you, Mr. White.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Edward. Very, very nice to have you on the agenda here. So thank you for that information. I'm going to shift now to global case studies. So to keep our discussion going, we'd like to start by presenting 4 programs that are inspirational in promoting youth engagement. So the first case study I'd like to start off with is one from 4-H Global. Let's pop up the video.
Hi there, my name is Logan Emery, and I'm the chair of the Global 4-H Youth Committee, a committee that represents 4-H as an organization worldwide. To start, what is 4-H? Well, 4-H is a positive youth development program that is based around the world and helps introduce young people to agriculture, food production, as well as homemaking skills, and gives young people the skills to provide for themselves, their families, and their communities. 4-H has its roots deep in agriculture, as it was originally a program that helped young farmers learn best practices about animal husbandry, crop production, horticulture, as well as homemaking skills to provide for their families. That was over 100 years ago, and now this program has grown to over 70 countries worldwide and still has those same values of teaching young people the skills to provide for themselves as well as the communities around them. So what are some of the success stories that 4-H has had? Well, anytime you teach a young person the important skills of agriculture and the best practices to improve the farms that they come from is an amazing success story. But even more importantly, 4-H often gives people who did not grow up on farms the opportunity to learn about food production. And that has really helped advance young people's understanding of how food is made, as well as introduced the interest into the next generation of wanting to become involved in agriculture and food production systems. That is the main way that 4-H is helping develop the food production system globally. But it is much more than that. As a global organization, the network that we have created helps people from around the world to learn from each other and learn best practices, learn about different food production systems, and gives young people the opportunity to bring all of that learning home to them, their communities, and improve their lives and improve the way they do things. I'm looking forward to speaking with all of you and hope that I can share more of how 4-H is a fantastic organization globally and helping our world in the next generation of food production and agriculture. Thanks very much.
Thank you to Logan and to 4-H Global for your very inspirational work. The next case study will come from Nuffield International. Let us now turn our focus to that case study.
Hi, my name's Jodie Redcliffe. I'm CEO of Nuffield International Farming Scholarships. I'm based here in northern New South Wales, Australia, on an Angus cattle property. Nuffield International is the umbrella organisation for Nuffield in 13 countries, and each year we award around 70 scholarships to young farmers to travel the world and learn everything from innovation in production systems to social licence to sustainability. Each year they attend a global conference, which ensures that the Nuffield network remains alive much past their scholarship year, and it lays the foundations for their engagement in global issues. They also complete a global focus program, which is immersion in multiple countries, which is the embodiment of Nuffield's experiential and peer learning system. The companies that invest in Nuffield understand that the best way to make lasting change in agriculture is to invest in young people who bring global ideas and global networks back to their rural communities. The core of Nuffield is giving back, and one of our scholars believed in this so strongly that when he passed away last year from cancer, he left a legacy to grow the footprint of Nuffield globally. The Chris Reichstein Philanthropy Fund partners with businesses to award scholarships to farmers in developing nations to ensure lasting impact for rural communities. Since the fund was established just last year, we've awarded 7 scholarships in Chile, Brazil and Zimbabwe, and funded a further 4 delegates from Paraguay and Kenya to attend our global conference. Those farmers now have exposure to the differences and similarities that impact big issues and the confidence to express their views on such topics. We believe that diversity in gender, age, geography and background is the key to creating change and driving innovation in global agriculture through Nuffield scholarships.
Hi, my name is Jasmine Boxall. I'm from Toogoolawah in southeast Queensland. My topic is the application and adoption of carbon reduction and sequestration projects in the northern pastoral industry. I believe this is quite an important topic. We know that carbon is a very eminent conversation in industry, and I'm keen to be able to find mechanisms to drive application and adoption for our industry and be able to make some really positive contributions not only to carbon goals but also our business productivity.
Thank you to Jody and to Nuffield International for your great initiative. It's fantastic. Our next case study that we'll look at will come from Egypt, and let's have a look at that one. Excellent work, Ahmed. Thank you for that. And our next case study, we'll move to that now, will come from Climate Smart Agriculture Youth Network in Somalia. Let's have a look at that one.
I'm Nur Mohammed Abdi. I'm from Somalia. Our project is rural youth development, especially farming and fishing areas. We are just developing a project, especially in farming areas. We're just giving training, and as well as we're just giving starting input. We just did demonstration plots for those farmers, and then when they just learn, we just move to their own farmers. Then they are doing, for their own production, and we just trying to connect for those youth to the market to get like good information and to get, as well as for their production in good price. The other project that's very, successful now. We're just going to the next phase is fishing, especially for the coastal areas. People, they don't know, the importance of the fish. Especially before this project, they are dying, malnutrition. But now they get the knowledge for the essential nutrient of the fish. Especially they are just doing, taking or trapping the fish, and they are just using, daily food. But now we are just transferring, this idea as commercial. We're just now prepared like some boat, and then they start for fishing, and then to go to the market and to get some financial to develop, their livelihood. So this project is, I think, will be, the most important thing that for this youth, those they did not get, knowledge background and they dropped out the school. So I think, and this project is implemented, in Somalia. So thank you.
Great work you're doing, Nur. I'm not sure that you're able to join us. I know you've been in and out of the call and with connection issues, but regardless of whether you're on or not, we would really like to acknowledge your bravery over the last few days in making the program come to life in Somalia. We are very saddened to hear that last week you were held captive during your field work. Our thoughts are with you as you try to implement the project amongst very difficult times. Sustainable Development Goal 16 is on peace, and these trying times demonstrate we can only achieve food security with peace. So all the best to you, Nur. We've been certainly thinking about you. And hopefully you're on the call, but I understand if you're not. So now we're going to move to the global panel, and I'm pleased to invite our panel members for an interactive segment again. They will be available to answer your questions or respond to your interventions. So we would like to hear about what you think is needed to build on these examples and further youth engagement. So our panel is coming up now. We have Jody Redcliffe, CEO of Nuffield Australia and Nuffield International. Not sure if Nur is there or not. I do know that Logan Emery, Canadian member of the 4-H Global Youth Committee, is on. Logan, welcome. And Ahmed, I think Ahmed is missing as well at this point in time. So it looks like we have a panel of 2. Good thing we had 4 lined up. We got half that, which is understandable. There's connection issues and other issues with the other 2, which is unfortunate. But we will progress from that. I do know that we had some leftover hands up from the previous session here, and I'll keep an eye out for those. And I do have the first hand up here from Kristen Davis. Oh, it was there for a moment ago. Kristen, are you still there?
Yes, I'm still there.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, hi everybody. Great to see everyone, and thanks so much for this really, really interesting discussion and forum. It's so great to hear all the views and everything. I just wanted to ask the panel or anyone else who has an opinion about this, about thinking about young agripreneurs when they get started, maybe in an enterprise, not just farming or production, but anywhere within the agriculture value chain. And I'm trying to, together with the FAO Investment Center, I'm working on a study looking at the opportunities and the constraints that young agripreneurs face when they get started. And I'm wondering if it's possible to sort of narrow down to what are some of the key elements that young agripreneurs need as they get started, or what are the blockages that keep them from really being successful in their enterprises? Thanks.
Thanks, Kristen. Jody, let's hear from you first.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. Thanks, Kristen. I think the fact that only 2 of our panel are here highlights one of the things that's already been discussed earlier today, and that's connectivity. It is just absolutely vital that we have good connectivity wherever we live. Just because we live in Australia or the US or Canada doesn't mean our connectivity is any better than anywhere in Africa or the Philippines or anywhere else in the world. So it really is a global issue. And it will require both some policy work, but also certainly some cooperation between world governments to make sure that we can have that connectivity we need. So if you're a startup entrepreneur or an agripreneur, you need that to have your access to markets. So it's very important. In addition to that, you need to have that connectivity to create your networks. So we can see this evening, it is nighttime here in Australia. So this evening for me, the impact that connectivity can have on your ability to create networks. So creating those networks, of course, is just the first step. Continuing and cultivating those networks is vital for any young agripreneurs. And I think what this leads me on to is my reflections on the fact that, you know, we're talking now about youth in agriculture, but we need to understand that the reason this is so important is that it's a long game. We're in this for the long haul. We want to be making sure that our youth are empowered now and have the systems that they need in place now, whether that's access to capital, access to staff, access to connectivity, and access to networks, so that we can empower them to have a long-term journey in agriculture. And Jim Cano highlighted earlier for us that agriculture is not just farming, it's not just being out in the field, and even if it starts that way, it doesn't necessarily finish that way. So I think we need to understand that for our youth that are in agriculture now, that we're trying to attract into agriculture, their place in our food systems may change over time, and that is something we should be embracing and empowering. So we should be upskilling our human capacity in agriculture, however that presents itself.
Thanks, Jody. Logan, over to you.
For sure. And so I'd like to start off just by thanking everybody for having me. And to address the question, I think one thing that's been discussed a lot today is about young people's interest in agriculture. And I think that more than people realize, that interest is already there, whether it be through programs like 4-H or out of people's own interest in being able to manage their own business. The interest from young people to be in the agriculture industry is there, but there are barriers. And so that's exactly where your question comes in. And I think the largest one, obviously this can change by where you are, but is just that financial hurdle to get into, especially production agriculture, can really be a huge barrier for young people. When you're talking production agriculture, you're often like a full year out from your first profit when you're having to buy your inputs, whether that be fertilizer, pesticide, whatever that is. And that's even after you've talked about the purchase of an actual business. And for young people, not having that capital that they can go to a bank with and ask for a loan is an extreme barrier. And I think that's really where grants come in as such a necessary thing to kind of remove that barrier for young people, especially in production agriculture, to become involved and be able to make that hurdle of starting.
Excellent, thanks. I'm just going to interrupt here for a moment, just to note that Ambassador Hans Hoogeveen has joined our call. Welcome, Hans. He's the independent chair of the FAO Council and a leader on youth engagement. So thank you so much for joining us here. Okay, we have a couple questions now back to the panel. I know I missed Agonga at the earlier panel. So Agonga and Jessica, you both have your hands up. I'll ask each of you to both ask your questions one after the other, and the panel will address them jointly. Agonga, over to you, please. I think you're on mute, Agonga. No, you're still on mute. Maybe I'll go to Jessica. You can ask your question. Agonga, you'll work on your mute issue there. Jessica, over to you.
Hi, I hope I don't have background noise.
Yes,
Can you hear
go
me?
ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. Okay.
Now,
I wanted to add on what Christine had asked about why youngpreneurs fail to pursue the agriculture business. I think besides having the theoretical knowledge, they don't have the technical knowledge. So I don't know if they can have some mentorship, where they have someone who have the knowledge to take them throughout the route until the business is stable and will be able to stand alone. I don't know if that is possible. I think mentorship is also required where you have a professional, the big bucks who are already in the business can help young people see agriculture as a professional.
Thanks, Jessica. Agonga, do you want to go ahead with your question, please?
Yes. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. My question is, I'm the chairperson of the F3 Youth Group doing fish value addition and climate change community engagement. Finance is a challenge for youth startup companies and agribusiness processing company in Kenya right now due to COVID-19. But government policy, certification, and business operation permits required are too many from different government entities, and the fee charged are very high. What can be your take on this? That is my question.
Okay, I think hopefully we got pieces of that, Agonga. Again, issues with connectivity underscored once again, but I think we got the gist of it. So let's start with Logan, and we'll look for your response first. Logan, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so I'll start with Jessica's question. I did also have a bit of trouble here with Gonga's question, but to address Jessica's question about mentorship and finding mentors for people entering agriculture and young people, I think there's lots of good programs that are really structured in terms of mentorship that exist already. And a lot of the time it's about making sure that those are marketed to the right people and are accessible. And I think even outside of those really structured mentorship opportunities, that mentorship exists everywhere in agriculture, whether it is in that structured form or not. I myself am a fairly new producer in my own country, and just how many people are kind of at your door every day.
Thanks, Logan. Jody?
Thanks, Rick. I think Logan is correct. There is plenty of opportunity for mentorship. I sometimes wonder whether the word mentorship is a little bit of a barrier. It can be quite daunting for people to step up and be mentors. You'll often find people, even if they're quite accomplished in their field, in their particular industry in agriculture, are reticent to be called a mentor. That may be an Australian thing. We certainly have something over here called the tall poppy syndrome, which means we don't like to put our hands up necessarily and own our successes. But I think getting away from the title of mentorship, but certainly still having the programs in place is a good way to do that. So how we do that with Nuffield is by having a very strong alumni, where our current scholars can reach out to our alumni, our scholars all over the world, and ask particular questions or get in touch, or go in indeed and visit, because the power of actually visiting and talking in person to somebody is cannot be underestimated. And in that way, we have a mentorship program without giving it the title of mentorship. So I think, Jessica, that's a really powerful way of making sure that a mentor-mentee relationship is a practical relationship that will actually work to improve the young person's capacity in agriculture. And then moving on to Agonga's point, I think it was to do with finance and the barriers to finance. And certainly access to finance is a problem in its own, but then the rest of that issue is the red tape that is involved in setting up an SME or improving your own business profitability and scale. So once you do get the capital, however difficult that might be, then it's a matter of having to negotiate the barriers that are inevitably in place. So I think understanding that agriculture is a profession is important. it does require some skills. First generation farmers are, I think, becoming more and more common, and that is a wonderful thing. But it requires some skills, and then it requires some continuous learning to make sure that the person is skilled or is able to attract the staff, which Anna Carolina talked about earlier, attracting the staff that have those skills if you don't. So you might need somebody that is able to manage your staff for you. You might need somebody that's skilled in content creation for your website, or you might need a production manager for your cropping rotation. So those things aren't necessarily in the skill set of one particular person. I think that leads me to discuss how agriculture actually should be a part more visibly of STEM. So STEM is these days quite a common acronym in education. And agriculture is not part of that, so maybe it should be STEAM. So the skills that are needed in agriculture do span from technical right through to social and communication skills. So it's an enormous skill range. That means that there are opportunities, as a lot of our panelists today have talked about, for lots of different types of people to be involved in all the different facets of agriculture. But it also means there are definitely some skills that youth need to be involved. So we need to make agricultural education front and centre. It was really heartwarming to see in the chat that in different countries that is the case. And in Zimbabwe, Jessica was talking there in the chat about how agriculture is important from primary school right through. We had Claire Peltzer, one of our Nuffield scholars, speaking at the Pacific and North American dialogue this morning for me, yesterday in other parts of the world. And saying how that's not the case in Australia. We really have, I think, dropped the ball, and that's a case for our government policymakers to improve that, and we need to lobby for that, to make sure that agriculture is a part of our school curriculum. If we don't make agriculture visible right from very young youth, from primary school onwards, we won't get those people that are interested in having it as a career path.
Good points, Jody. I really looking at the clock, and we are extremely tight now. So we need to get to another lightning round here. And so I'm going to bring on the other panelists from the previous session. So first and second round panelists will come up, and I'm going to ask one question. It's going to be a lightning response, 60 seconds, 1 minute answers is all we really have time for. And the question for each panelist is, what is one policy we could create that would help young people start farming, get jobs, or start businesses in the food system? So we've got our panelists coming up here now. Maybe I'll start with you, Jody, first. You're first on my screen. So 60 seconds. What's the policy?
Thanks very much. And I think it absolutely follows on from what I was just saying. We need to make sure that there is a policy to make agricultural education absolutely pivotal to our education system.
Excellent. Thank you. Anna, over to you.
You already know that my answer is the same as Jody. And I would say agriculture and entrepreneurship, because we need to see the farm as a business, and to make it sustainable for the next generations. Yeah.
Thanks, Anna. Jim, go over to you.
Thanks, Rick. I think I'd go with, what's one of the things that's crucial post-COVID is helping young people transition into the digital economies and becoming ready for that. And so I think skills development to be ready for that, and infrastructure, digital infrastructure to support connectivity for young people, especially those who are marginalized in connectivity, and also the need for governance systems around data that is generated from these digital economies. So it's very crucial to have that in place with different sets of policies.
Thanks, Jim. Millicent?
So what I want to say is there should be a policy where there's a scholarship system that trains the youth especially those in very poor communities, to be able to further their education in agriculture and also possibly come out with innovative products that can feed the next generation. So there should be scholarships and funding opportunities put in place to ensure that even the poorest communities also promote agriculture on all levels. Thank you.
Thanks. Wayne, over to you.
Thank you, Rick. We live in such a technology-driven world these days, and the technologies of the future are going to be fundamental in meeting the challenges of climate change and sustainable food systems. I feel we need very targeted policies to enhance existing partnerships between government, civil society, the private sector, and financial institutions to ensure that access to technology does not become cost prohibitive or a barrier to entry for young farmers.
Excellent. Thanks, Wayne. And last but not least, Logan, over to you. Oh, your voice is not coming through, Logan.
I'm going to hop on the technology train a little bit, and specifically, everybody here will agree on rural internet access. I think that's just such a barrier for people in agriculture in general. That's a commitment to rural internet access for all people would be the biggest policy I think that could be put in place that would benefit rural communities, both agriculture and non.
Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, what a tremendous discussion we have had. We've covered a lot of ground today in a short period of time, and we are running to the end of the program now. And I just really want to thank you to the panelists and all the hard work that everybody's put into this program today. It's been exceptionally informative and the very robust discussion. So very much appreciated. And now it is my pleasure to hand it over to Nele Herman Valente to bring closing thanks from Bayer.
Thank you so much, dear Mr. White, and thank you to all participants of this important dialogue. Mr. White, you said something of crucial importance, so I'll just repeat it here. We can only have food security if we have peace, and we all need to work together to achieve both. My name is Nele Herman Valente, and I lead Bayer Crop Science's Next Generation of Agricultural Leaders efforts. On behalf of the entire private sector mechanism, I would like to encourage you all again to engage in CFS, whether member states, civil society, research, or private sector. And if you are a young person, please do engage too. We need to listen and learn and engage with you. In fact, we need all actors working together to advance global food security, and the effective voices of those who are young now are crucial for defining future-proof strategies for sustainable agriculture. We do hope you will consider the private sector a partner. At Bayer, we have long promoted youth engagement. Since 2013, we have provided global young advocates with opportunities to learn, network, be mentored, and engage for concrete impact at our own Youth Ag Summit. Last year, we took the next step and initiated the new Next Gen Ag Impact Network, short ENGINE, together in a coalition of 17 founding partners. And today I'm happy to be speaking to you also as chair of the ENGINE board. ENGINE lives up to UN Sustainable Development Goal 17, Partnerships for the Goals, and creates a new global forum with young people that sets out to increase the attractiveness of agriculture for future generations in all sustainability pillars, economic, ecological, and social, and to create impact on the ground. The coalition partners co-create with one vote each to bring opportunities to young people and that match their needs. And we do so across sectors, including all, in particular, youth movements, associations, NGOs, think tanks, farmers organizations, the academic sector, but also international organizations and the private sector. To give you just one quick example, youth across the globe raised interest in learning more on how to effectively raise their voices at UN fora. So we offered open access training sessions this April to facilitate for that upskilling. As a result, 16 of these young leaders chose to join the PSM youth mechanism, And many of them, as well as other Engine representatives, I can actually see here today on this event, and that's excellent. To anyone who's not yet familiar with Engine, please have a look at the website and sign up in the Stay Tuned section so that we can actually listen to you, include you, and channel opportunities your way. We must continue sharing our experiences and learning from each other to accelerate actions for youth and give young people a voice directly into decision-making. Because it is you who are young today who will be the leaders of the future. And it is you who will be most affected by the decisions taken today. So please ensure to make yourself heard so that paths that allow for a full suite of fair access from land to water, to nutrition, to jobs, technology, finance, and power can be built for young people. Now, with this said, thank you to all the people who made this event possible. You are indeed giving young people the space they critically need and deserve. First, thank you to Mr. Rick White, President of the Canadian Canola Growers Association, for leading us through this session. We appreciate Chairman Gabriel Ferrero of the CFS and CFS Secretary Helga Dorn, and the Ambassador of Switzerland for the guidance of CFS on this important topic of youth in agriculture. I would also like to thank Her Excellency, Mrs. Zeynep Eli Salem, His Excellency, Thomas Duncan Jurado, our Rapporteur, Steve Ngungi, Mr. Matt Armstrong, Mr. Kazuki Kitauka of the World Food Forum, as well as all the excellent leaders and panelists, and our very attentive audience. Your reflections and case studies and the conversation were once again simply inspiring. It was a pleasure to have you all join us throughout this meeting and the regional dialogues. Please keep up the great work and best of luck for all of you on the ground with all your work you do. Thank you.